Hello, Wyoming. This is Product Attorney Jason Oakes, and I welcome you to today's Wyoming Health Watch. Thank you for joining us. Today is a really interesting health watch that I think you'll find very informative. What we did, we were involved and actually continue to be involved in the opioid litigation in a major way. My firm represents 4 counties/cities in the state of Wyoming, in the state of Nebraska, and the state of Kansas, and the state of Colorado. So a large Rocky Mountain swath of representation. And for those of you who have seen it in the papers, the premise is a public nuisance claim against the manufacturers and distributors of opioid medications. And the argument is that enormous public resources, everything from law enforcement to hospitals to our court systems and all of the above, have been impacted by the epidemic, the opioid epidemic that is alleged to have been caused by the manufacturers and distributors as a result of breaking and failing to follow federal law. In any event, one of the things that we came to know about in the litigation and subsequently became public data was there is something called ARCOS data. ARCOS is an acronym. It's ARCOS, and ARCOS is data that is kept by the U.S. DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and they literally have tracked for years and years and years and years and years each and every opioid pill in America. Originally in the litigation, which was ultimately consolidated before Judge Dan Polster in Cleveland, Ohio, the reason for that consolidation is anytime there is a major litigation, there are multiple federal lawsuits filed all over the country in order to make it more efficient, so we don't have situations where perhaps a judge in Wyoming rules one way and a judge in Louisiana rules a different way. We don't have these competing orders. So what the federal system does is they assign it to one judge. That judge works up the cases so there's not this inconsistency potential with the various orders. And then once the cases are ready for trial, he sends them back to their own jurisdiction to be tried. So that's what happened here in the opioid litigation. The litigation was consolidated before Judge Daniel Polster, in Cleveland, Ohio, in U.S. Federal District Court. I had the chance to get to know Judge Polster back in 2005 when I worked on what was the gadolinium litigation at that point against GE Healthcare. That's a whole nother area that I won't go into here. But the bottom line is he's an excellent judge. We're very pleased with him, very fair judge. But the ARCOS data initially, when it was sought by the plaintiff's bar in the litigation from the DEA fought us on that. And you'd think in a litigation like the opioid litigation that would have been aligned, one would think, with the DEA. Certainly that was our intent and our initial impression, but when they started fighting back in our ability to get the ARCOS data, and the ARCOS data was important because that helped us identify additional defendants that needed to be held responsible and accountable for the opioid crisis, and we couldn't identify those additional defendants without getting our hands on the ARCOS data. In any event, we prevailed on that issue before Judge Polster. He ruled that the ARCOS data be produced by the DEA, but it had to be produced in an extremely protective manner. So there was an ironclad protective order put into place. There was requirements that every lawyer involved in litigation had to sign off on the protective order, and the protective order was extremely detailed on the consequences if you, as a lawyer, or if you're by extension your client, disclosed any of this ARCOS data, especially to the press. There was serious ramifications. So we were able to get our hands on the ARCOS data initially and start identifying for our many clients and cities and counties the additional defendants that needed to be named in each of their lawsuits. And meanwhile, while that was going on, and we were there was a gag order in place that prevented us from talking about any of that, the Washington Post decided they were going to take Judge Polster's order on the ARCOS data up to the Sixth Circuit and challenge the protective order. And the Washington Post argued that the data was of public concern and public health, and therefore it should not be held in confidence, but rather it should be disclosed to the public. And the Washington Post prevailed on that several months ago, and now that ARCOS data we can disclose it without harm. We can share it without worry about the federal court coming back after us and holding us in contempt of the protective order. So One of the things that I was interested in doing is going through the ARCOS data for a number of reasons, not only for our clients, but just in general for Wyoming, my home state. I was most interested if there was any Wyoming pharmacies that made the top 10 list, or excuse, not the top 10, the top 100 list. The ARCOS data covered an enormous number of pharmacies. It was thousands of pharmacies, and each and every pill in and out of those pharmacies was documented. And you'd think a small state like Wyoming, we've not had a lot of attention on the opioid crisis. Our Attorney General hasn't been aggressive on it at all. And really, but for our firm, I don't think we would have been involved, or I don't think Wyoming would have been represented at all. But in any event, I was curious, was there any pharmacy in Wyoming that broke what was considered kind of the top tier list, the top 100 pharmacies that provided pills per person per year in an amount that made them a top 100 candidate? So we started carefully going through the data, and I'll tell with you what we discovered. Let me start with the top 10, and then we'll talk about whether there was any in Wyoming that made the top 100. The top 10 was interesting because it was for the most part Midwestern states. There was 3 out of the top 10 were out of Kentucky. 2 out of the top 10 were in Kansas, of all places. And then the rest were quite random. There was Illinois out of Hardin County was number 2. There was Lewis County, Idaho, which caught my attention, which was number 3 in the country. They sold 88 pills per person in their little tiny community. So that caught my attention when Idaho made the list. There was also Smith County, Tennessee, which was at 72 pills per person, and then also Mingo County, West Virginia, which was at 70 pills per person. And the number 1 was in Clinton County, Kentucky, at 96 pills per person. So this is per person per year. So of all the pills that pharmacy distributed for that year, and this would be an average between 2006 and 2012, Clinton County, Kentucky, if you divided all those pills by the number of people that made up their population, obviously that would include infants and children that obviously would never get pills, but 96 pills per person per year occurred in Clinton County. Now, in order to make the top 100 list, a pharmacy would have had to hit 36 pills per person per year. And that was number 100 was out of Clay County, Kentucky. A lot of Kentuckys on the top 100 list. Clay County, Kentucky. There was Community Drug of Manchester, which sold 36 pills per person per year from 2006 to 2012. So the question remains was there any facility, any pharmacy in Wyoming that cracked the top 100? And certainly I was optimistic when I first jumped into the ARCOS data and the review of it that I would not find any that fell within the top 100, especially we're a small state. And again, because there hadn't been a whole lot of attention on opioids, initially I figured there probably wouldn't be any breaking at the top 100, but I was wrong. And there was one pharmacy that broke the top 100, and in fact it ended up at number 54 out of 100. It almost broke the top 50. And plenty of you, probably if you're from Wyoming or familiar with Wyoming, and you're guessing where this pharmacy might have been. A lot of you have shared with me Riverton, and I think that's a good guess, but that's not correct. Others thought just because of the sheer volume, maybe it was Cheyenne or Casper, but those aren't correct either. I had a lot of people suggest Evanston. Evanston, for those people who are unfamiliar with Wyoming, is where our state hospital is. I thought that was a great guess, and that was one that came up on my list as a potential when I started digging into this data. And Evanston is not in the is not the one that made the top 100. And you really think about the other parts of Wyoming, it's kind of like Newcastle up in the northeast, or Gillette, or Cody. None of those darken the door on the top 100. So it may come to surprise that the The pharmacy that not only darkened the door on the top 100, but in fact almost made the top 50, was out of Hot Springs County, Wyoming, specifically Thermopolis. And that was a pharmacy called Vickland Pharmacy, which is, as I said, located in Thermopolis, Wyoming. And I told you that the spread was anywhere from the top pharmacy was 96 pills per person per year. The 100th pharmacy was 36 pills per person per year. And Vickland Pharmacy out of Hot Springs County, Wyoming, hit 44 pills per person per year. So a very high number for not only Wyoming, but frankly for the entire country. A very concerning number. And I did some further research. I've not seen that any sort of legal redress has been made against Vickland Pharmacy out of Hot Springs County. I think it should. There are specific guidelines that pharmacies had to follow throughout the country to make sure that they weren't distributing more than they should have. And because of that sheer volume of numbers, and because of the fact that it broke the top 100 and almost broke the top 50, I would really like to see our Attorney General and those in law enforcement do a deep dive into the Vickland Pharmacy, because I know a lot of people in Hot Springs County. I've gotten to know a lot of good people up there in Thermopolis. For those of you unfamiliar, Thermopolis holds our natural hot springs. It's a great place to go soaking if you enjoy hot springs. It's also, if you're going up to Yellowstone National Park via Cody, you're typically going to go through Thermopolis. It's a wonderful little community, but certainly a community that doesn't deserve to be on the near top 50 list for a number of opioids per person per year. So for those of you listening, I appreciate you listening. I am happy to announce that I didn't find any other Wyoming pharmacies on the top 100. Although we're still climbing through the data, I'll provide additional data as I get through it on the other areas of Wyoming and other concerns that one would see as they get through this data. If you have any questions, go to wyominghealthwatch.com. Send me an email. If you're interested in your county or your community, whether there's any particular pharmacy in that community that may have hit the list, whether it be top 100 or top 200 or top 500, shoot me an email and I'll get back to you. I look at every email that comes in. Thank you for listening, and thank you for caring about these sorts of items within Wyoming and beyond. I'm Jason Oakes, and this is your Wyoming Health Watch. Have a great day.